Fox News alert, it is no deal, at least for now, as a high-stakes summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ends abruptly without an agreement. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith in New York City.
Hey, Sandra, I'm Bill Hemmer. Third day here in Hanoi, Vietnam. It's been a dramatic 24 hours. This entire day has been news-filled in Vietnam after President Trump and his delegation abruptly ended their talks with Chairman Kim a bit earlier today. There was an expected signing ceremony. It did not happen. There was an expected luncheon today with a camera trained on the table where no one showed. That did not happen. A press conference took place 2 hours earlier than scheduled. Then Air Force One was wheels up from Hanoi, Vietnam. Here's how the president described the final moments when they made the decision to break off the talks.
They wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that. I think we'll end up being very good friends with Chairman Kim and with North Korea, and I think they have tremendous potential. I've been telling everybody they have tremendous potential, unbelievable potential, but we're going to see. But it was about sanctions. I mean, they wanted sanctions lifted, but they weren't willing to do an area that we wanted.
And there was an awful lot of news and headlines inside that press conference today with Secretary Pompeo to the president's left. This video you're watching here is one of the meetings they had at the hotel, the Metropole Hotel in the old quarter of Hanoi, and it appeared to be going quite well. You read the body language, and both men seem to be quite comfortable with each other. We've seen that on camera numerous times over the past 24 hours or so. A couple of things here that I would note. Inside that press conference earlier today, there was a sense of optimism. I'd say it was tempered on behalf of Secretary Pompeo and the president. I would also suggest to you that this is not over by a long shot. And either one of two things is going to happen. They either believe they have moved Chairman Kim into an area where they wanted to have him and are most comfortable, or Chairman Kim is going to go back to Pyongyang and will do something that will surprise the world yet again. It's either option A or it's option B, and we wait to see what happens. President Trump was wheels up about 7 hours ago, Sandra. Yeah. Secretary Pompeo went to Manila. The Vietnamese foreign delegation went to Beijing, China. And Chairman Kim remains here in Hanoi tonight. So we'll see about his movements throughout the city of Hanoi. He was expected to go to these special economic zones outside the city. He was a no-show yesterday, stayed behind in his hotel. So how you're trying to make an impression on him about the changes in Vietnam and letting him know that he has a chance to take his country and his people to that point. At this point in his country's history, it is unclear as to whether or not that message has been received the way the American side and Vietnamese side wanted that, Sandra. Some open questions now in Hanoi.
Open questions and no deal for now. Bill, thank you. But first to the president's former attorney, Michael Cohen, back on Capitol Hill today. What a day it was yesterday. This will be his third straight day of testimony, this time behind closed doors before the House Intelligence Committee. It follows yesterday's fiery hearing that became must-see TV throughout the day. Plenty of reaction. That continues to pour in this morning.
What I do think was going on today is I think this was the first step in the Democrats' crazy impeachment plans.
I want to proceed very cautiously. But isn't it interesting that not one person on our side even mentioned the word impeachment? Not one. Not one. Not one. They did, but not us. Again, I'm hoping that this is, well, not hoping, I know. This is not the end of a process, but the beginning.
He lied a lot, but it was very interesting because he didn't lie about one thing. He said no collusion with the Russian hoax. And I said, I wonder why he didn't just lie about that, too, like he did about everything else.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill for us this morning, where the action continues. Mike?
Sandra, good morning. Some Republicans sound skeptical that they will learn anything new from Michael Cohen, but today it is the House Intelligence Committee's turn. Cohen arrived earlier this morning, but did not answer any questions from reporters. His attorney, Lanny Davis, says they will have something to say when today's session is done. This morning, the House Intelligence Chairman insisted this hearing will be helpful.
We'll get a lot of good information from Mr. Cohen, but I'll have more to say later on. Is there anything from yesterday that you feel like you didn't cover?
I don't think time permitted them to go into a lot of what we'll be able to discuss today. A lot more to say later on.
It was a very different scene in front of the House Oversight panel yesterday. Lawmakers, staff, and the country heard hours of testimony from Michael Cohen when some Republicans questioned how this could benefit the president's former fixer.
So testimony here could actually help you out in getting your sentence lessened. Isn't that true?
I'm not really sure how my appearance here today is providing substantial information that the Southern District can use for the creation of a case. Now, if there is something that this group can do for me, I would gladly welcome it.
A newly elected Texas Republican says Congress should be tackling other issues.
My Democrat colleagues appear more interested in political theater than in doing the job that the American people want us to do here in Congress. People that I talk to back home are excited about what the president is doing, not what Congress is doing.
Some Republicans suggest that lawmakers would be better off leaving the investigation to special counsel Robert Mueller and the FBI. Sandra?
Mike Emanuel on the Hill for us this morning. Thank you. Grassroots conservatives, meanwhile, kicking off their annual CPAC conference today as Democrats appear to embrace socialism more than ever. Our next guest will be on stage a bit later this hour, putting a sharp focus on the nation's growing debt. Georgia Senator David Perdue joins us now. He sits on the Armed Services Committee and the Budget Committee. Senator, good morning to you. Thank you. And Bill's going to join us, too, out in Hanoi for this conversation. But if you could, in the last we checked, $22 trillion our national debt has reached. What is the message at CPAC? What are we going to do about it?
Well, I think this president has called this out before, but as you said just 2 weeks ago, our national debt ticked over to $22 trillion. And more draconian than that, Sandra, is that over the next 30 years alone, we have $130 trillion of unfunded future liabilities of this federal government. That's $1 million per household. President Trump came in 2 years ago and said, we've got to grow the economy. Well, there were two benefits of that. One is you put people back to work, but two is you get federal revenue from growth to help offset this growing debt. Now, in the last 2 years, we've started an economic revival here that we believe over the next 10 years lowers the debt curve by about $3 trillion. And yet, over the next decade, unless we do something, we're going to add another $10 trillion to a $22 trillion debt. That can't happen.
Andy Biggs, who's sponsoring this legislation to declare the $22 trillion debt a security threat, says that the United States is racing towards a fiscal cliff. I know that you were quoted also in this article saying that bureaucrats and career politicians aren't even blinking an eye at that. Why is that?
Well, look, the easiest way to get reelected, and you've got career politicians who give money away, basically. We spend federal dollars, and it makes it easy to get reelected. The problem is, with this size debt, the interest rate increases of the last 2 years have caused our interest expense to go up $450 billion. Now, put that in perspective, discretionary spending is about the same as it was in 2009, but that's only about 25% of what we spend. The other 75% are mandatory expenditures. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, pension and benefits for federal employees, and the interest on the debt. There's our problem.
It is a big problem indeed, and at the same time, a lot of talk on the left from progressives about socialist policies. And I know you'll be talking a lot about that this morning. I want to bring in my co-host Bill Hemmer from Hanoi to join the conversation. Bill.
Yes, sir. One of the main headlines from Chairman Kim today is that he actually took a question from a reporter. I don't know if you're aware or not of that. It happened about 10 hours ago here in Vietnam. The reporter's question is, are you willing to denuclearize? And he said, I would not be here if I was not willing. Where do you think the state of play is for these negotiations is at the moment, sir?
Well, we were all hopeful that we might get some sort of an agreement in a signing ceremony. But, you know, let's be realistic. This is a process. I give President Trump and his team a lot of credit that they brought Kim Jong-un to the table, and I believe that we will eventually get there. It's a process. We can't give up our sanctions. I support the president in that. We need to see measurable results. We need to put inspectors on the ground, and I believe we will get there. I believe that North Korea and South Korea and the United States all want the total denuclearization of the peninsula, and I believe we'll get there.
Do you believe Chairman Kim is willing to give up 30 nuclear weapons in his possession?
I think if we make the incentive strong enough he will have to do that. I've been over there, Bill. I've seen the refugees coming out of North Korea. Our sanctions are working. It's a dire state there, and I believe that he really ought to be willing to rejoin the community of nations. And the way to do that is to make a deal with the United States and get rid of those nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Have you considered the alternative? What if he goes back to testing? What if he fires off a missile or a rocket or something worse, an ICBM?
Well, I think the president has said this before, that one of the measures of progress is that over the last year and a half, we have not seen that, and that's a major step. If he goes backwards, then obviously the sanctions can be increased. There are a number of other options, and the president has said before, all the options are on the table. We will not allow North Korea to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, Senator, thank you for answering those. Sandra's got more back there in New York.
Senator Perdue, I've got to ask you about trade. We were just talking to Maria Bartiromo here about the growing optimism that a deal will get done. The president's been working with China on this. The markets seem to be predicting something will get done. Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative, sounding like this. Listen to this first.
We are making real progress. If we can complete this effort, and again I say if, and can reach a satisfactory solution to the all-important outstanding issue of enforceability, as well as some other concerns, we might be able to have an agreement that helps us turn the corner in our economic relationship with China.
And Senator Perdue, he's now talking about dropping this threat to raise tariffs to 25% on those $200 billion of Chinese goods. What are you hearing on this?
Well, I'm very encouraged because that means we're making substantive progress. I think by having Secretary Mnuchin and Lighthizer over there recently negotiating is another positive sign. I used to live over there and worked over there. I've dealt with quota and duty my whole career. I can tell you that this is going to take time, though, and I don't want to create a false expectation that we're going to solve all these problems in the next 30 or 60 days. I think this is a beginning of a process. The Chinese are indicating and performing in a way that make us believe that they really want to get to a level trading playing field, and that's what the president's trying to do.
Senator Perdue, what would ultimately make those trade negotiations a success?
Well, I think the equal access is a beginning. If we took certain products and categories and started opening up their markets in a way that we've not seen before, that's a great first step. The other is compliance with WTO. The theft of U.S. technology, the forced transfer of technology and joint ventures. I've been a victim of that. I think those are two of the early steps that we could see coming out of China. It would be terribly, terribly encouraging.
Sounds like a lot of enthusiasm from that crowd there behind you at CPAC as it's underway now, Senator.
It was a weird scene in Washington today.
Absolutely.
All right, Senator Perdue, we appreciate your time this morning, sir.
It was a weird scene in Washington today. President Trump,
We're sending a lot of supplies down to Venezuela. People are starving to death. And you would really think that the man in charge currently would let those supplies get through. We are getting them into some of the cities and some of the areas that need them the most, and it's not an easy job.
And yet today in
that message and that comment there really opened up the press conference here in Hanoi. Breaking news from overseas now. President Trump weighing in on the ongoing crisis in Venezuela. Those comments here in Vietnam coming after Venezuela's foreign minister accused the U.S. of trying to overthrow the government of the disputed President Nicolas Maduro. Steve Harrigan is live in Caracas, Venezuela for the latest on there. Steve?
Bill, on the ground here in Venezuela, there are no visible signs of progress in removing Nicolas Maduro from power. On the border between Venezuela and Colombia, that border is still blocked by the Venezuelan side. You have desperate Venezuelans trying to leave the country, actually crossing rivers or forests to do so. The attempts to bring in mass amounts of humanitarian aid through that border have failed. The attempts also to turn large numbers of the Venezuelan military against Maduro have also failed. There have been a few hundred defections, but nowhere near the huge number that some people had hoped for. As for the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, he is in Brazil today. He was in Colombia before that. He's trying to rally international support. More than 50 countries recognize him as the president of Venezuela, including the U.S. he's going to have a tricky time getting back in the country here. He could face arrest. He says he's going to start exercising the duties of president. It's not clear how he's going to be able to pull that off. Maduro still controls the military and the police. We could see some diplomatic action this afternoon at the UN, some competing resolutions, including one by the U.S., which will call for new presidential elections in Venezuela. That is likely to be vetoed by Russia. Bill, back to you.
More to come. Thank you, Steve. Steve Harrigan, good to have you back on the ground there. Thank you, sir. Sandra, what's coming up next?
All right, well, some new economic numbers are out for the fourth quarter of last year, and what they're telling us now about the health of the U.S. economy. Plus, progressive House Democrats finally unveiling their Medicare for All bill.
Today.
So how much
President Trump, you'll remember, ran for office promising to fix immigration and make good deals.
Next. Fox News alert, GDP numbers for the fourth quarter are now out. According to the Commerce Department, the U.S. economy did downshift just a bit, growing 2.6% in the final 3 months of last year, slowing since the first quarter of 2018. All right, he's going to put it in context for us because there's a lot of numbers involved here. Charles Payne, host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network. What was really key was that this number was better than expected, right? It didn't slow as much as many predicted with the government shutdown and everything.
Right. It was significantly better than anticipated. And the nuances, you break down this number, it was absolutely phenomenal in the sense that we saw a strong rebound in business investment. We see a strong consumer. That's your ultimate 1-2 punch. You want a strong, confident consumer and you want businesses investing. I got to tell you, though, the most prominent evidence in this report that the tax cuts are really, really working, intellectual property products investment. Absolutely through the roof, up 13%. I mean, if you look at the last 4 quarters there, that shows that businesses are putting money into the right place, right? IP, we're talking about investments for the future. That is the future. So I happen to love the number. By the way, we're at 2.9% now for the year. Put me on record for saying once they revise this, I think we'll hit 3% or better.
You know, Maria Bartiromo was saying something very similar. So this is it for now. This number could be revised. But for now, the White House was projecting 3% growth for all of 2018. It did come in below that at 2.9%. Of course, some of the headlines are running with the economy did not meet White House expectations.
Yeah. It's sort of like if Michael Jordan said, I'm going to score 60 points and he scores 59. There would be a few people, I told you he couldn't do 60. Listen, this is a number we don't get very often anymore in this country. In fact, this is a number many people wrote off saying we could never even come close to 3% a year. Settle for mediocrity. Let's accept it and go from there.
Now,
here's one thing I will say.
As usual.
I think the consumer was just a little bit worried. So savings went to 6.7% from 6.4%. It didn't help that we had that massive sell-off in the stock market also. So there are some exogenous events that might have impacted this to that 1/10 of a percent that we didn't make it yet.
All right, we want to throw up this Rolling Stone magazine cover. We talk a lot about the left talking about the Green New Deal and a lot of spending. And this is the women shaping the future, obviously featuring some familiar faces there, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Nancy Pelosi, Ilhan Omar. You know, their message is resonating with more people in this country than you probably would have ever expected. Why?
Because it sounds good. It sounds like utopia. Everything is taken care of. I don't have to do anything. Listen, this is not the first time we've heard this. Remember, FDR had the 4 freedoms. One was a freedom from what? Fear from what? We never have to want for anything. So it sounds actually great. Now, what they're trying to do, listen, I give them credit for this. Now they're trying to figure out how to articulate paying for all of this. And one of the things going through is the idea that, since everyone's now agreeing that deficits don't matter, why not just have the government pay for this? Why not just have the Federal Reserve print money for this? If you're going to print money for trillions of dollars to bail out banks, why not do the same thing for free health care? So, it is getting traction, and I think it's going to gain more traction.
They're rolling out this Medicare for All bill. It calls for a transition to a single-payer system within a 2-year period. Supporters of the bill say that it would save Americans, the American people, 14% on health care costs per year, Charles.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they got to that number. I will say respected organizations like the Mercatus Center said it would cost us about $33 trillion over 10 years. Douglas Holtz-Aiken, his organization's at $36 trillion. And most of the elected officials who are behind this are saying, hey, give us a chance to refine the numbers, give us a chance to refine the cost. So not a lot of people who are actually behind it as a concept have actually been able to put a dollar amount on it. And also, we really need to think deeply and hard about the idea of just this whole thing being run by government. 100, 200,000 jobs out the window. People already work in this industry. But the impact, the real quality of healthcare, does anyone believe it would get better? I for one don't. But if you believe that, then this might be for you. But it could ultimately also bankrupt the country.
Well, that Rolling Stone cover with those new rock stars, as some are calling them, they talked a lot about the Green New Deal, the controversial Green New Deal. Talked also a lot about impeachment of the sitting president. Want to move on to CPAC because it's underway. We've already talked to a couple folks from there this morning. Seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm to come down on some of those messages that we're hearing from the left. Final thoughts, Charles?
Yeah, CPAC, the theme this year is an anti-socialism theme, and I think it's smart. There's a massive wave. I always said, though, it was more anti-capitalist than pro-socialism. Those are just the alternatives that we understand. But there is a massive, massive movement against capitalism. Let me tell you, Sandra, yesterday I read a headline. Walmart's going to get rid of the door greeters. About 30% of them are disabled people with cerebral palsy. Walmart's going to get rid of them? I mean, these are the things that just add fuel to the fire for this anti-capitalistic movement.
All right. Charles Payne, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Bill?
Sandra, we're keeping an eye on Capitol Hill. Michael Cohen is back there. He arrived 90 minutes ago. He is behind closed doors today. Third time this week, only a day after this explosive public hearing.
For those who question my motives for being here today, I understand. I have lied, but I am not a liar.
Democrats say they learned new information. Republicans say it was all just political theater. The A-team will take it up in a moment. Next. Plus, sometimes you just have to walk away. President Trump's message today from Hanoi, Vietnam. There is no deal with Chairman Kim. Reaction from Hanoi, South Korea, and back at home coming up in a moment.
Well, they wanted to denuke certain areas, and I wanted everything. And the sanctions are there, and I didn't want to give up the sanctions unless we had a real program. Are less important than the areas that we want. We know the country very well, believe it or not. We know every inch of that country, and we have to get what we have to get, because that's a big give.
A lot of shockers today here in Vietnam. President Trump on why he cut the second summit short by several hours. They did not sign a declaration at the end. That was thought to be the case today. It did not happen. South Korea, U.S. ally, watching this very closely, as is the entire region and the world for that matter. Greg Palcott's back live in Seoul, South Korea. Spent a lot of time in the Korean Peninsula. And how's South Korea taking this news tonight, Greg?
Bill, as you can imagine, the folks here in Seoul are a little bit let down by the outcome of the Hanoi summit. They were counting on success there to keep their own relations with North warming. Officials formally expressing regret. For example, up in the air is a visit by Kim Jong-un here to Seoul. That was expected maybe in the next couple of weeks. Now that is not sure. Still, in a phone conversation between President Trump and South Korean President Moon, assurances were given that dialogue will continue. Also a positive, the promise from Kim Jong-un that nuclear testing and missile launches would be suspended. That's a good thing for this part of the woods. Bill.
Yeah. Greg, you've been to North Korea so many times. Do you believe that Chairman Kim has arrived at a point in his country's history where he is willing to change internally that would advance his government, advance him, advance his people in 2019? Do you think he's there?
Now, from everything I've seen, everything we've seen in our visits to North Korea, Bill, we do get the sense that there is a need for change in North Korea, that, in fact, there is a desire by Kim Jong-un, remember, he's the third generation of the Kim family, to bring North Korea into the 21st century, to change the economy. But also, from everything I've heard from everybody that we've spoken to on the ground, they still feel they need those nukes as some kind of a security blanket. For example, this is exactly what President Trump has been pitching to Kim Jong-un, that he can bring an economic revolution to that country that can change North Korea. And he's been pitching that directly to Kim Jong-un. We spoke just a short while ago, Bill, with an always outspoken analyst. His name is Andrei Lankoff. He thinks that Kim still feels he needs the nukes no matter how rich North Korea may become. Take a listen to what he said.
You know, dead people cannot be rich. He wants security first.
Dead people can't be rich.
And he believes that he needs nuclear weapons for his physical and political survival. And yes.
Dead people can't be rich. That's the direct line coming from Lankoff. Lankoff also says the events of today, Bill, are just a reminder that this Korean Peninsula is still a rough neighborhood. There are still a lot of challenges ahead, but he has hope as well. Back to you.
Good reporting there. That's a statement of fact, by the way. Dead people can't be rich. Greg, thank you. Good work there in Seoul. Want to get back to New York and Sandra with more there. Sandra.
All right, thanks, Bill. Well, Senator Lindsey Graham just tweeting this out moments ago on all of this. I appreciate the effort by President Trump to reach a peaceful conclusion to the North Korean nuclear threat. It's better to walk away then sign a bad deal. Let's bring in America's A-Team. Marie Harf is here, former State Department spokeswoman and co-host of Benson and Harf on Fox News Radio. Morgan Ortegas, former financial intelligence analyst for the Treasury Department. And James Freeman, assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, all Fox News contributors. Good morning to you, James. Wall Street Journal this morning, it seemed to not call anybody a winner or loser. Did each walk away with potentially something here?
Well, I think it is nice that the president didn't feel the expectations demanded him to accept whatever was on the table. We heard about how South Korea's government has been disappointed. Maybe they wanted to deal a little too much, but I think we know that a lot of our allies in that region, Japan especially, are very relieved. They see an aggressive, hostile North Korea, and they don't want the president to let them off the hook for no reason.
Morgan, what'd you think?
Yeah, I agree with that largely. And I think, the options here are, what do we do going forward, right? So I think there's a number of things that the administration can do. I don't think we're going to go back to a full maximum pressure campaign where you have the two sides threatening each other and tweeting at each other. I didn't see the president leave with an indication that it's going to get hostile again. But what you can do is a number of things like sanctions. Right now we talked about this. You can try to get the Chinese and the Russians on board because they are helping the North Koreans to evade sanctions, so you can make them tougher. And you can continue the dialogue and the negotiations here. So I don't think we're going to go back to the rhetoric of 2007, but we clearly don't have, a new peace initiative yet.
But still some running with the headline that the president walked away with no deal, that this is a failure, Marie.
Well, it's true that he didn't walk away with a deal. And we were talking, Morgan and I were talking about this a little bit before the show. Many of us who've been involved in these kinds of negotiations did not have that expectation. These are very complicated technical issues. There hasn't been all the legwork done at a lower level below the president to get some of these tricky issues worked out. I mean, this is the challenge, right? When you jump to the presidential level and you haven't worked out among secretaries of state or experts what denuclearization will actually mean. That is work that still needs to be done. And so I actually didn't have the expectation that I would wake up this morning and see some signed deal. And I actually would have been worried if that had been the case, because so many of these complicated issues reportedly have not been hashed out yet at a very technical level, and that needs to happen now.
And Bill, you were at that news conference, and you were somewhat surprised. I know you said that there wasn't an announcement of a third summit before they left there.
Yeah, there was a strong hunch that we would get some indication of that. Maybe that comes in the coming days, but it did not come today. I'll take you back to the press conference, because right before that happened, Sandra, the president sat down with Sean Hannity. Well, actually, they stood one-on-one here in Hanoi. This is how he framed the decision to get up and end the talks.
We're working towards something, but we didn't sign anything today. It didn't quite work out. I would say that I wasn't satisfied, and perhaps he wasn't satisfied. Good relationship, but I decided that this wasn't the right time to sign something. So we'll see what happens over a period of time.
Well, Two very specific questions, first to Morgan and then to Marie Harf. Morgan, when the president talks about the relationship, it is clear to us that the relationship is building.
Right.
I don't know how much further you need to go, but these men are at least comfortable around each other. Do you believe that Trump and Pompeo got Chairman Kim to a place where they were satisfied?
Well, I don't think that they're fully satisfied in the sense that they had to walk away from the negotiation, without a deal, especially as it relates to sanctions. I do think that the United States continues to have the upper hand here because Kim Jong-un does want out of these sanctions, because of the economic impact that we're having here. But like I said, this is a continual process. From the North Korean perspective, and we talked about this on the 5 last night. From the North Korean perspective, we are still very much at war. They don't trust us. They think that we want to invade and reunify the peninsula. There's been rhetoric out of some of the leaders in this administration to that would make them think so. So we're coming at it from two very different worldviews, and getting them to the table and getting some trust on both sides is a major step. This is the art of diplomacy. This is why people like Marie and I spend our entire careers doing this, because it takes time.
Yeah, not to exclude James, but Maria's specific question is on the State Department. The president flew halfway around the world again, twice in 8 months. My hunch is Chairman Kim thought he was going to get something from this. And at the last moment, they pull the rug out from under him and they turn tail and fly back to Washington, D.C. It was almost as if there was a sucker's bed out here for him to jump on. And he showed some more cards in this. And when you talk about diplomacy at the State Department, I think that has to be a bit of a stunner for the Koreans.
Probably, because Donald Trump publicly was also, I think, setting expectations pretty high for this summit and for what he could accomplish based on his own personal relationship. So it absolutely puts another element into this negotiation here. But the question, Bill, is what comes next and how that is used in these negotiations. These aren't some, movie drama that we're just looking what the next side will do publicly. The real meat of these is the question that is still outstanding about whether North Korea is actually willing to denuclearize in exchange for some set of sanctions relief. The intelligence community still not sure that that's the case. They're skeptical. That is the underlying question above all of this public, drama. That hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. We know that. Back to Sandra now with more. Thanks to both of you. Thanks. And James next time, okay? I promise.
Yes, sir. Well, I'll go to James on this because I want to move on to Michael Cohen because we know he's behind closed doors. Another hearing happening today, but the public hearing yesterday, the Wall Street Journal editorial board put out a piece this morning, Cohen in the Coliseum, talking about the legal fixer unloads on his former boss with little new information. This piece basically goes on to say there's a whole lot of drama, but very few new details emerged from that public hearing yesterday. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think you saw the market reaction, which was basically a shrug to this event. This is, I think, intended or hoped for by Democrats to be kind of the step one in the impeachment case, but there was nothing new, no collusion claim, and if this gets down to claiming that it's a campaign finance violation that the president paid off a mistress. That has been tested in a previous case. It is not a campaign finance violation. And I think what has to worry Nancy Pelosi is if her caucus or the most radical parts of it keep demanding an impeachment case when it's not there.
Well, the president did say that he watched some of that testimony yesterday. He was talking to Sean Hannity in the press conference this morning. He actually said, as far as Cohen's concerned, he's convicted. He's a liar. He's defrauded at a high level. He went on to say the Russia collusion is just a witch hunt hoax, said the president this morning. We're going to leave it there. Our A-team and Bill, thank you, everybody. Plus some other big fireworks in the Michael Cohen hearing yesterday were not only the issue that we saw yesterday. Race wasn't the only issue. Also rearing its head on Capitol Hill is a whole lot more. Howie Kurtz will be here to break that all down for us next.
The fact that someone would actually use a prop, a black woman, in this chamber, in this committee, is alone racist in itself.
Named Vice President Pence and suggested that people in power wanted to, quote, cause suffering. Now that Smollett's charged with staging his own attack, Page writes in the Hollywood Reporter, quote, when the rhetoric we read and the hate speech we hear comes from our politicians, our media and entertainment, our neighbors and families, and our religious leaders, we internalize the pain in damaging, self-defeating ways. We are wary and afraid to report hate violence. We lose hope as we continue to be victimized. Media Buzz host Howard Kurtz joins us on that. What did you make of that now reaction from the actress, Howie?
Sandra, Ellen Page is engaged in pure damage control, trying to change the subject. She didn't just rush to judgment on Jussie Smollett's hoax. She blamed Mike Pence and, to a lesser extent, Donald Trump. She went on Stephen Colbert and said we have to connect the dots for a supposedly homophobic attack that never happened. Now, it's fine for her to pivot to, the reality of hate crimes, whether they deserve more coverage. I don't have any quarrel with that, but she's not expressing a smidgen of regret. Ellen Page owes Mike Pence an apology for smearing him over a non-existent attack.
Yeah, and it seems that even though we're moving farther and farther away from the revelation that this was a hoax, we continue to hear from those who immediately spoke out in reaction to that, Howie.
Yeah, and some, at least, journalists and others have had the class to say, I spoke too soon, I rushed to judgment, I should have waited for more facts. And, again, it's fine for her to make the larger case that this doesn't mean there aren't hate crimes in the United States of America. But how about expressing some sort of regret at what you did, because she immediately went to the political, it's Vice President Pence's fault somehow. And then turns out this never happened. In fact, it was a spectacular racially charged hoax, and she just kind of writes around that.
Meanwhile, I want to get to the Michael Cohen hearing yesterday, because there was a lot of drama throughout the day, and you have penned this piece headlined, under hyper-partisan questioning, did Michael Cohen damage Trump? You attempt to answer that question in your piece. You say the bottom line, the day-long extravaganza probably did little to change the minds of Trump supporters who view him as a pathetic convicted criminal, or Trump opponents who view him as a reformed sinner, now shining a light on the president's dark deeds. So did the president, or did Michael Cohen damage the president at all with this hearing?
Well, obviously, the president's former lawyer painted a very dark picture of him, and some of the things he had to say about racist comments and so forth were disturbing. But he spent so much of the hearing fending off attacks on his own credibility. Obviously, he is a convicted liar, convicted, of course, of lying to Congress, that I think it may have overshadowed what he had to say. The other thing, Sandra, is that Cohen, where he did provide specifics, for example, hush money payments to Stormy Daniels or efforts to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, he kind of was going over ground that we mostly knew about because of past reporting. And the one new thing he had to say, which is that there was supposedly a phone call from Roger Stone to President Trump about advanced knowledge of the WikiLeaks dump on the Democratic emails, Stone is disputing, and he says no Russian collusion. So I think it wasn't a great day for Donald Trump being attacked in that fashion. But I think while Michael Cohen may have helped himself a little bit in terms of his own image and agonizing over his past wrongdoing, I think he undercut himself by being so relentlessly personal in his attacks on the man he worked for 10 years.
Howie Kurtz, great to get you on the program this morning to react to all of that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bill?
In the meantime, another hot spot where a leader stepping in to ease growing military tensions between India and Pakistan. What President Trump is now offering on the diplomatic front, that became an issue today in Hanoi. We'll tell you what was said coming up.